Hello everyone, here we are. We're going to do 1 Chronicles 25, so let's get started. David, together with the commanders of the army, set apart some of the sons of Asaph, the name I told you to remember, Heman and Jeduthun for the ministry of prophesying. So those three men, he's setting aside some of the sons of those three men. Let's read that again. David, together with the commanders of the army, set apart some of the sons of Asaph, Heman, and Jeduthun for the ministry of prophesying, accompanied by harps, lyres, and cymbals. Remember I told you that God likes to talk in front of music? God really likes that. Here is the list of the men who performed this service, and I personally think it's because the heart opens when music is played. You know, the stress of the day goes away and you can actually hear the Lord and what he's saying, and it goes right into your heart. All right. From the sons of Asaph, Zakat, Joseph, Nethaniah, Azarellah. The sons of Asaph were under the supervision of Asaph, who prophesied under the king's supervision. As for Jeduthun from his sons, Gedaliah, Zeri, Jeshiah, Shimei, Hashabiah, and Mattatiah, 6 in all, under the supervision of their father Jeduthun, who prophesied using the harp in thanking and praising the Lord. As for Heman from his sons, Bukiah, Mattaniah, Uziel, Shubael, and Jeremoth, Hananiah, Hanani, Elithah, Gidalti, and Romamti-Ezer, Josh Bekashah, Malachi, Hothar, and Mahazioth. All these were sons of Heman, the king's seer. They were given him through the promises of God to exalt him. God gave Heman 14 sons and 3 daughters, so he was mightily blessed with children. Okay, so Heman is one of the king's seers or prophets. All these men were under the supervision of their father for the music of the temple of the Lord, with cymbals, lyres, and harps for the ministry of the house of God. If you hear something going, it's my fan. It's very stuffy in here today. Asaph, Jeduthun, and Heman were under the supervision of the king, along with their relatives, all of them trained and skilled in music for the Lord. They numbered 288, young and old alike, teacher as well as student, cast lots for their duties. The first lot, which was for Asaph, fell to Joseph, his sons and relatives. The second to Gedaliah, him and his relatives and sons. The third to Zakur, his sons and relatives. The fourth to Isri, his sons and relatives. The fifth to Nethaniah, his sons and relatives. The sixth to Bukiah, his sons and relatives. The seventh to Jesarela, his sons and relatives. The eighth to Jeshiah, his sons and relatives. The ninth to Mattaniah, his sons and relatives. The 10th to Shimei, his sons and relatives. The 11th to Azarel, his sons and relatives. The 12th to Hashabiah, his sons and relatives. The 13th to Shubael, his sons and relatives. The 14th to Mattatiah, his sons and relatives. The 15th to Jeremoth, his sons and relatives. The 17th to Josh Bekashah, his sons and relatives. The 18th to Hanani, his sons and relatives. The 19th to Melotai, his sons and relatives. The 20th to Elatah, his sons and relatives. The 21st to Hothar, his sons and relatives. The 22nd to Gidalti, his sons and relatives. The 23rd to Mahazioth, his sons and relatives. And the 24th to Romamti-Ezer, his sons and relatives. Okay, so let's go to 26. The divisions of the gatekeepers. From the Korathites, Meshelemiah, son of Kor, one of the sons of Asaph. Meshelemiah had sons: Zechariah the firstborn, Jediel the second, Zebediah the third, Jathniel the fourth, Elam the fifth, Jehohanan the sixth, and Elihonai the seventh. Obed-Edom also had sons: Shemaiah the firstborn, Jehozabad the second, Joah the third, Saker the fourth, Nathanael the fifth, Amiel the sixth, Issachar the seventh, and Pulatai the eighth. That's Peulletlethai. He was the eighth, for God had blessed Obed-Edom. Obed-Edom's son Shemaiah also had sons who were leaders in their father's family because they were very capable men. The sons of Shemaiah: Othni, Raphael, Obed, and Elzabad. His relatives Elihu and Semachiah were also able men. All these were descendants of Obed-Edom. They and their sons and their relatives were capable men with the strength to do the work. Descendants of Obed-Edom, 62 in all. Meshelemiah had sons and relatives who were able men, 18 in all. Hosea the Merarite had sons: Shimri the first, although he was not the firstborn, his father had appointed him the first. Hilkiah the second, Tabaliah the third, and Zechariah the fourth. The sons and relatives of Hosea were 13 in all. These divisions of the gatekeepers, through their leaders, had duties for ministering in the temple of the Lord, just as their relatives had. Lots were cast for each gate according to their families, young and old alike. The lot for the east gate fell to Shelemiah. Then lots were cast for his son Zechariah, a wise counselor, and the lot for the north gate fell to him. The lot for the south gate fell to Obed-Edom, and the lot for the storehouse fell to his sons. The lots for the west gate and the Sheleketh gate on the upper road fell to Shuppim and Hosea. Guard was alongside of guard. There were 6 Levites a day on the east, 4 a day on the north, 4 a day on the south, and 2 at a time at the storehouse. As for the court to the west, there were 4 at the road and 2 at the court itself. These were the divisions of the gatekeepers, who were descendants of Korah and Merari. Their fellow Levites were in charge of the treasuries of the house of God and the treasuries for the dedicated things. The descendants of Ladan, who were Gershonites through Ladan and who were heads of families belonging to Ladan the Gershonite, were Jeheli. The sons of Jeheli, Zetham and his brother Joel, they were in charge of the treasuries of the temple of the Lord. From the Amramites, the Ishharites, the Hebronites, and the Uzzielites, Shubael, a descendant of Gershom, son of Moses, was the official in charge of the treasuries. His relatives through Eleazar: Rehabiah his son, Jeshiah his son, Joram his son, Zikri his son, and Shelomith his son. Now remember, these were living people, okay? So don't get bored yet, just hang in there. Shelomith and his relatives were in charge of all the treasuries for the things dedicated to King David by the heads of families who were the commanders of thousands and the commanders of hundreds, and by other army commanders. Some of the plunder taken in battle they dedicated for the repair of the temple of the Lord, and everything dedicated by Samuel the seer. Remember the prophet Samuel, the one who chose David and anointed him, or anointed David as the chosen one of the Lord. And by Saul, son of Kish, who was the king. Abner, son of Ner, and Joab, son of Zeruiah, and all the other dedicated things were in the care of Shelomith and his relatives. So they had to watch over the battle plunder and the precious things, okay, in the temple. From the Israelites, Kenaniah and his sons were assigned duties away from the temple as officials and judges over Israel. From the Hebronites, Hashabiah and his relatives, 1,700 able men, were responsible in Israel west of the Jordan for the work of the Lord and for the king's service. As for the Hebronites, Jeriah was their chief, according to the genealogical records of their families. See, their family trees are playing a big part in this. In the 40th year of David's reign, a search was made in the records, and capable men among the Hebronites were found at Jazer in Gilead. Jeriah had 2,700 relatives who were able men and heads of families, and King David put them in charge of the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh for every matter pertaining to God and for the affairs of the king. All right, chapter 27. This is the list of the Israelites, heads of families, commanders of thousands, and commanders of hundreds, and their officers who served the king in all that concerned the army divisions that were on duty month by month throughout the year. Each division consisted of 24,000 men. In charge of the first division for the first month was Jashobeam, son of Zabdiel. There were 24,000 men in his division. He was a descendant of Perez and chief of all the army officers for the first month. Now, Perez was Tamar's son from Judah. Do you remember that whole story? She pretended to be a prostitute. She got that son. In charge of the division for the second month was Dodai the Ahoite. Mikloth was the leader of his division. There were 24,000 men in his division. The third army commander for the third month was Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, the priest. He was chief, and there were 24,000 men in his division. This was the Benaiah who was a mighty warrior among the 30 and was over the 30. His son Amizabad was in charge of the division. The fourth, for the fourth month, was Azahai, the brother of Joab. His son, or Asahai, the brother of Joab, his son Zebediah was his successor. There were 24,000 men in his division. The fifth, in the fifth month, was the commander Shamhuth, the Israelite. There were 24,000 men in his division. The sixth, for the sixth month, was Ira, the son of Ikesh, the Tekoite. There were 24,000 men in his division. You see how all of this is painstakingly written down for us, okay? This is history right here. The seventh, for the seventh month, was Helez, the Pelonite, and Ephraimite. There were 24,000 men in his division. The eighth, for the eighth month, was Sibbecai, the Hushathite, a Zerahite. There were 24,000 men in his division. The ninth, for the ninth month, was Abiezer, the Anatotite, a Benjamite. There were 24,000 men in his division. The 10th, for the 10th month, was Maharai, the Netophatite, a Zerahite. There were 24,000 men in his division. The 11th, for the 11th month, was Benaiah, the Piratonite, an Ephraimite. There were 24,000 men in his division. The 12th, for the 12th month, was Heldai, the Netophatite from the family of Othniel. There were 24,000 men in his division. The leaders of the tribes of Israel over the Reubenites: Eleazar, son of Zikri; over the Simonites, Shephatiah, son of Makkah; over Levi, Hashabiah, son of Kemuel; over Aaron, Zadok; over Judah, Elihu, a brother of David; over Issachar, Omri, son of Michael; over Zebulun, Ishmael, son of Obadiah; over Naphtali, Jeremoth, son of Azriel; over the Ephraimites, Hosea, son of Azariah; over half the tribe of Manasseh, Joel, son of Bediah; over the half tribe of Manasseh and Gilead, Iddo, son of Zechariah; over Benjamin, Jasiel, son of Abner; over Dan, Azarel, son of Jeroam. These were the leaders of the tribes of Israel. David did not take the number of the men 20 years old or less because the Lord had promised to make Israel as numerous as the stars in the sky. Joab, son of Zeruiah, began to count the men but didn't finish. God's wrath came on Israel on account of this numbering, and the number was not entered into the book of the annals of King David. Let's read that again. David did not take the number of the men 20 years old or less because the Lord had promised to make Israel as numerous as the stars in the sky. Joab, son of Zeruiah, began to count the men but didn't finish. God's wrath came. Okay, so this is the story of the weird counting that David did. You know, here's God promising to give him as many as the stars in the sky, but he wants them to be counted, and Joab was repulsed by it and didn't count the Levites or the Benjamites. So it says here, he began to count the men that didn't finish. God's wrath came on Israel on account of this numbering, and the number was not entered in the book. Okay, so we don't know what that number was. Asmaveth, son of Adiel, was in charge of the royal storehouses. Jonathan, son of Uzziah, was in charge of the storehouses in the outlying districts, in the towns, the villages, and the watchtower. Ezri, son of Calub, was in charge of the workers who farmed the land. Shammai, the Ramathite, was in charge of the vineyards. Zabdi, the Shipmite, was in charge of the produce of the vineyards for the wine vats. Baal-Hanan, the Gederite, was in charge of the olive and sycamore trees in the western foothills. So to take away from the tedium of this, imagine what it is that they're ruling over. There's farmland, there's vineyards, there's wine from the vineyards, there's olive trees, there's sycamore trees. Joash was in charge of the supplies of olive oil. Shitrai, the Sharonite, was in charge of the herds grazing in Sharon. Shaphat, son of Adlai, was in charge of the herds in the valleys. Obil, the Ishmaelite, was in charge of the camels. Jedediah, the Meronotite, was in charge of the donkeys. Jaziz, the Hagrite, was in charge of the flocks. All these were the officials in charge of King David's property. Jonathan, David's uncle, was a counselor, a man of insight and a scribe. Jehiel, son of Hakmoni, took care of the king's sons. Ahithophel was the king's counselor. Hushai, the Archite, was the king's confidant. Ahithophel was succeeded by Jehoiada, son of Benaiah, and by Abiathar. Joab was the commander of the royal army. And we know that already because we saw and heard the exploits of Joab. So that's it for tonight. You got an earful of names, but let's think about what we were looking at here. In the first chapter, we were looking at the gatekeepers and the musicians and how they were all set out to minister in the temple. And in the second chapter, we were looking at, the first chapter was the musicians. My gosh, the whole first chapter was the musicians. The second chapter was the gatekeepers. And then the third chapter was telling you who it was that was taking care of the rest of King David's possessions. So I love you very much. I'll see you tomorrow, and we will pick it up with, let's just look here and see what's going on in Chronicles. There's 29 chapters, so tomorrow we'll finish this book and probably go into the second book of Chronicles, and we'll get through this, okay? So just use your imagination as we go to make it less tedious. At least you'll know that you really have read the Bible, and there is a reason for this stuff. These names won't sound foreign to you if we hear them in the future, okay? You're going to get it, all right? Or if they say so-and-so, the gatekeeper back in David's time, you're going to remember, okay? So there's a beauty to this, as there is with the entire Bible. I love you, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.